Kat, welcome. Lovely to see you online.
I was hoping to have one of your beautiful backgrounds, and I failed. But Chris has one of your beautiful backgrounds.
It's really unpredictable because sometimes the platform just says no, and I'm not sure why. We'll imagine a lighthouse beside you.
Thank you. You are my lighthouse.
You have the book Training to Imagine, so we will imagine.
I do. We can imagine.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure. And let me know when you need the slides. I'm going to be off the air. Just remember to take turns so our interpreter, who's very talented and has to translate it now, will get at speed with you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. We're here to talk about listening as a storyteller. And I know this is a theme throughout a lot of the conversations that we've been having so far. To be vulnerable, as Suzanne was just saying, I will say that in some ways, this is the hardest, the most challenging conference that we take part in, because there's so much wisdom and knowledge already in the room about these topics that figuring out how to offer something that is new and fresh for these very wise, very experienced people is always a challenge, but it's one that we embrace. So thank you for having us.
Well, paying compliments to the crowd is a good way to do it. So thank you so much. Right. Please enjoy, and I'm here if you need me.
Great. So hi, everyone. I'm Kat Coppett. This is my colleague, Chris Esparza. And as we said, we want to unpack a little bit today about listening as a storyteller. One of the things that Chris has been a mentor to me in is remembering that the listening part, the receiving part of communication is at least as important as the what are we sharing. And I feel like a number of us in this community are recognizing that storytelling isn't just about spraying a narrative, but it's about co-creating meaning and supporting and receiving others in discovering and sharing meaning. So Artem, you can put up our slides and we'll sort of unpack some things around that. We have a framework around what we call facilitation excellence, but it's really a leadership framework around what are all of the different pieces that we can think about when we want to facilitate communication, support groups or individuals, which we think is at the heart of not just professional facilitators or coaches, but any leader or any human being. They're equal, right? Those maybe are synonymous, who wants to be able to make things easier, which is right the root of the word facilitation. And specifically, two of those are listening and engaging with story. And the longer we do this, the more we feel like those are intertwined skills, that you can't really be a good storyteller unless you're receiving and listening to your audience. And you can't really be a good leader unless you're eliciting story and supporting hearing all of the voices in the room. So we're going to do just that. We're going to look at listening and storytelling. One of my favorite quotes about storytelling is from Yuval Harari, the great author of *Sapiens* and Historian of Humankind. He says you could never convince a monkey to give you a banana by promising limitless bananas after death in monkey heaven. And what this speaks to for me is the power of story, as I think this crowd knows, that we are storytelling creatures. And so one of the things that we think about that connect listening and telling of stories is that the activity of telling a story is happening in our brains all the time. Right? Story, as Jerome Bruner says, is meaning. And so someone, when they are communicating to us, are in fact telling us a story, or they're trying to figure out their story. How can we help connect the bridge between what someone is trying to communicate and what we're receiving, or what we're trying to communicate and what they're receiving. That's a listening activity, not just a speaking activity. So listening. The first thing about listening is, I don't know what that slide is. It's someone else's slide. That's okay. I can keep talking. The first thing about listening is that it's hard. Maybe Artem, you can figure that out for us. It's hard. Listening is hard. So if I put up this picture and I say, who is this person? Maybe some of you might be able to guess and recognize it. Feel free to type it into the chat if you can. Who is that? Who is that? Some of you may recognize Adele. Yay, great job. Good guess. How many of you noticed, though, that her eyes and mouth were upside down in that picture? Isn't that sort of scary? What happens is, this is originally called the Thatcher effect because it was done with a picture of Margaret Thatcher. There are two things here neurologically. One is we just are very good at recognizing faces and connecting to other humans. But the other is we make up stuff. So there's data that comes to us, someone speaking to us. What we hear is not necessarily the actual truth of what is coming at us. There's all sorts of interpretation. All right. So the first thing to remember about listening is it's just hard. We are not machines. We don't receive 100%. We only receive an interpretation of what we think we're receiving. And that comes from our previous associations, our ambient narratives, everything else. I'm not going to do this activity with you now because we have so much to get to, but what I will say is, if I asked you to count all of the red things on this slide, you would do it. And some of you would just count the little red objects in the slides. Some of you would also go like, oh, you can't fool me. You count all the red things that you see. Oh, those are letters. I see the letters are red. I'll count those. Some of you would recognize that there were borders around or not. Some of you might count individual leaves. Then we could have a question about what is red. Are these red or are they pink? So there's all sorts of, and then some of you would recognize that this says count all the red things you see. Well, does that mean just on the slide? Or maybe there are other red things in my environment that I'm looking for red things in my environment that I can also count. Even very simple instructions or very simple words can be very hard and have lots of interpretations. So we would get a very different number of things at counting this slide. What is red? Yes, exactly. It's deep. So before we even get into how do we listen as a storyteller, I think it's important to recognize how hard it is to listen. The next thing to think about as we listen is, what are we listening for? So knowing that we have to bring ourselves fully as listeners, what are the offers, to use an improvisational theater term, that we're looking for and we can receive? We've given you a nice little acronym here. We call it deep dive listening, because we're not just listening for facts and information. We can also listen for intention, for values, and for emotions. And if we're listening as a storyteller and we're trying to make meaning, the intention of the storyteller, the values that they're expressing, the emotions that they have are just as important elements of that story, in some cases more important than the specific facts of what they're saying. So with all of that as foundation, let's practice our first level of listening as a storyteller, shall we, Chris? So I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to complain about something. And what I want you to do is help me figure out the meaning of my story. And And you're going to do that by doing two things. You're going to say, here's what I hear you say. Sure, Artem, yeah, bring down our slides. Here's what I hear you say. And you'll feed back to me what you literally heard me say. So the facts and data of what I said. And then here's what I get about you, or here's what I hear that you value. And I want you to feed back to me what you interpret my intention is, my values are, my emotions. I may not have said literally that second things, what you hear, but you're going to help me make meaning of my complaint. So, all right, here's what I'm going to complain about. So I currently have a number of clients where they come to us, they hire us to create workshops and facilitate for them. And we have needs analysis conversations. We design something for them. We make a big point of saying we want to collaborate. But we get to a point where I feel like we're not being trusted. And they'll say things like, oh, that activity that you wrote in the agenda, I don't think that's going to work with our people. Can we change it? Or what's the objective of here? I don't think our people are going to like to do this. And on the one hand, I understand. I understand the fear, right? I get all that. But there's another level where I feel like I might be sacrificing doing the best job that we can do by trying to please the client or ameliorate their fear when they haven't actually experienced the work. So I feel frustrated that sometimes I don't know where to acquiesce to them and where to sort of stand my ground and how to do that in a way that makes them comfortable.
Love that. Thank you, Kat. So let me start with the first prompt is what I heard you say. And as an overview, I heard you say that you currently have been working with a number of clients and that typically they come to you, they hire you, you work with them in a needs analysis conversation. And ideally you want to collaborate, but that often what you're finding lately is that you get to a point where you're feeling that you're not being trusted and the client may say things like, this isn't going to work, or looking for something different than what you have proposed. And so while you understand that feeling, you're wondering about kind of whether you're compromising, or I think the word you said is sacrificing too much in order to ameliorate those fears. And so that's essentially what I heard you say.
Yeah, great, perfect.
Great. Underneath that, what I hear you either valuing and maybe some of the intentions, I think the key word that maybe gives me some clues there was trust, that this idea that not feeling trusted. And I'm imagining that there's some frustration around how to ground both in your competence while still meeting the needs of clients. So I think your intention in this is to wanting to serve the clients, but also kind of claim expertise that you have honed over many, many years and many, many clients, a sense of kind of being able to hold that credibility with folks. And so with that is maybe also this sense of what you care about is in some ways some things both offering value and wisdom and expertise, while you also care about serving the needs of clients. And some of the tension I'm hearing underneath this is how those two collide.
You know, it's interesting to hear you feed that back to me, because I think you're right. I think what you heard in me when I told it to you was a conflict between, oh, I have this expertise and my client, and I want to serve my client. And what I noticed when you were feeding it back to me is, in fact, I think the tension really is, I really want to serve my clients. And I feel like the tension is between making them happy or comfortable in the moment, in the design moment ahead of time, and offering what I really believe is going to be of the most value to them. That was helpful. It helped me figure that out. Great. So I'm curious, as people hear us do that and think about deep dive, what's resonant? What questions do you have? What might be fresh or helpful, if anything? I'll give you a second to type it in chat if you've got any questions. as you're thinking about that, we'll move on. Artem, maybe you can bring up the next slide. Yeah, good listening, Chris. Absolutely. So that's one level of listening as a storyteller. The next level is to actually use storytelling structure and our knowledge of storytelling structure to help our conversation partner craft their story or understand the meaning of their story. Carol asked, could you say, I've heard this from a previous client and here's what happened. Yes, I think what that move, Carol, is about sharing a story back, right? Or looking for a solution. And I think there is a moment in the conversation where that becomes very helpful. If we leap to it before I've helped you get your story out, I might be like stealing the talking stick a little bit or putting my story on top of the story that I'm listening to. But at some point, I think it's a great, it's a very helpful move is to share a story back. Yeah, beautiful. So I'm guessing some of you are familiar with the story spine. If you're new to it, it's a set of sentence prompts created by an improviser and playwright named Ken Adams. And the idea is that it describes the essential components of a well-made, coherent story. So we use this as a critical thinking and problem-solving tool. We use it as a visioning tool. We use it as a story crafting, narrative crafting tool. And in this moment, what we want to talk about is using it as a listening tool. So we've got, so Chris, you're going to tell a story, and I'm going to use the story spine. Actually, don't even tell a story. Just give me like an issue or a problem or, a headline, if you will, of something you're working on or something that happened to you. And what I'm going to try to do is use the story spine in my head to help you expand and craft what you're trying to say. So I'm going to have questions that are like platform questions or consequences questions, and we'll figure it out together, like what you've offered and where I want to guide you. So we have not planned this, by the way, folks. This is absolutely not.
Excellent.
So what do you got?
The headline is The Wedding Weekend.
The Wedding Weekend?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me, what was your plan when the weekend started? What were you planning to do?
We were invited to a dear friend's wedding out of town, about 5 to 6 hours drive from where we live. And so we were headed on a Friday. We left to go attend as guests to this wedding that was going to be on Saturday. Great.
And did things go as you planned?
No.
Oh,
they did.
What happened that changed your plan?
Well, on the drive to the location, we began to receive. We had invited some other friends we knew who live in the area to maybe meet for drinks since we were going to be in town, and we started to get some notices back from them that the power had gone out due to some storms that had passed through, and it was starting to sound more and more severe than we had it come to realize.
Oh, so what did you notice, or what happened? How did that impede what your plan?
Ultimately, I think there was some 90,000 people who were out of electricity in the downtown area of this city, which included the hotel that we had reserved, did not have any power to it. And again, we drove not knowing any of this until we arrived and checked in at the hotel, and we were handed a letter from the manager that explained, due to the severe storms, we have a backup generator, but the rooms don't have any power. If you would like to continue your stay with us, here are 2 glow sticks that you can use to see your room. Yeah.
No. So did you stay there?
We stayed there because we didn't think we had many other options at that hour of the evening, and we presumed others were probably, without electricity, were also maybe looking for hotel rooms for the night or whatnot. So we decided to go to the grocery store on the other end of town that had electricity, bought some things to create a picnic in our room, and a lantern that was battery powered. And we made a little picnic in our room and slept there for the night. Mm-hmm.
That sounds sweet. So did you ultimately get to the wedding?
We did. We changed hotels the next day, and that turned out to be an amazing, beautiful reminder of what was an inconvenience, if not even frustration and hassle, and a lot of uncertainty about what would come next. The friends that got married were incredibly grateful that we were there. They were they've gone through some challenges in life, and we've been with them through that. So to be there for this particular milestone was really important for them. There were tears. So it was a sense of, wow, 24 hours ago, we were in a bit of chaos, and now we're at this wedding. And while that chaos hasn't disappeared, this moment will last and reverberate for them and for us. So the wedding was lovely. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. So Chris is an excellent storyteller and doesn't need my help all that much. But what I was trying to demonstrate here was simply thinking about the story spine and moving Chris along in his story. So this is a sort of what comes next, how did that, what is the cause and effect in this story, what happened because of that, following these steps, right? If any of you want to go do a deeper dive into the Story Spine platform, we can come back and do that. But as I had it in my head, that's what I was listening for. The other thing that I can listen for are details. So if I could say, tell me more about this, explain that more, go more deeply into this part, and then move forward in advancing. It's another great way to listen. Yes, beautiful. Even good storytellers benefit from structured listening. How can I listen with the narrative in mind? What's the point of this? Where's the intention? If I'm going to add help, if I want more detail, I might say something like, so what did you have for your picnic? Or how did it feel? Were you disappointed and frustrated with no power, or was it super romantic? Did you how did that feel being there? Or if Chris hadn't volunteered it, he said, yes, we got to the wedding and everything was fine. Well, how was it at the wedding? Was there energy? How were people feeling about the blackout? Those kinds of things. And again, I can support the storyteller for me, helping me understand as the listener, but also for themselves. There was a question here a little earlier about what changed for me when Chris heard my story and fed it back. And you might have noticed there was that moment, which is authentic, where he said, you have this tension between, wanting to sort of share your expertise and wanting to serve the client. And what I realized when he fed it back to me was, actually, that's not the conflict. The conflict is between doing what I feel like is going to actually serve the client and what the client thinks is going to work or serve them, or what they're comfortable with. So what it did for me was recognize, I understand my own story. I understand my dilemma. I would be solving the wrong problem if I was saying, how do I get them to accept my expertise, or how do I sublimate my ego in order to serve them? But if I recognize what's true is that I feel like I have something to offer, and I have to get better at telling them the story of why this is safe or how it's going to work, which, by the way, Carol, might be a story of how it worked with another client. So I think, Artem, you can take down the slides and maybe we can just answer some questions. What's resonant for people? What are you curious about? What might be fresh and new?
Thank you so much. This is a great sharing and a great demonstration. I love how, despite being experienced, you still prompt each other in a very effective manner. And we have one question from Yelena, which is a really good question. How to be a good listener in front of the big audience? I will come to that. A big audience is always a big pressure, for the storyteller is anxious, and you need to create space for him. So, like, how do we do it? This is really interesting.
Yeah, I love it. I have a question about, and you mentioned it a little bit, Artem, but what's the challenge in front of a large audience? What are some of the things that make that harder, maybe, than listening one-on-one? You can type in the chat for us, or if you need to translate for us, Artem. So one is I might be nervous, right? And if I'm nervous, it's harder for me to pay attention, right? Another might be when we do our listening workshops, we talk about who am I listening to? And one of the things that happens when I'm listening in front of a large crowd is I'm listening to the person who's speaking, but I'm also listening to the room, right? And what is going to serve the community and the client. So in this moment, as I listen in front of a group, I'm listening to Chris's story, but I'm also saying, how am I demonstrating this in a way that's going to be useful to the crowd? Or what might they be thinking about it? Am I getting those challenges right?
Well, for me, yes. Helena, if that's something you were thinking about, please let us know or add some challenges. Maybe you could elaborate on these. And yes, thank you. It's about listening the room. Yeah.
Room. Yeah. I think it's a wonderful question, right? To recognize. And I'd be curious about your answer too, Chris. I think for me, it's about recognizing that I'm listening to more than one person at once and being clear about what is the intention of the moment and how do I balance those needs, right? So if I have a person in a workshop that I'm doing, for example, who says, this is really upsetting for me, or I have a real problem with applying this, or yeah, this sounds great, but I have a boss who isn't going to let me do this. I could be listening to that story in a room and helping that person draw it out if it's going to be safe and comfortable for them, and if it's going to serve the learning in the room. I might say, let's talk about that at a break, or I'd love to hear more about that and help you, and make it one-on-one. But if I'm listening in the moment and drawing the story out in the moment, then what I'm listening for is how to help this person, but also how to use it as a learning experience for everyone else. So that's one answer. And then the other answer is to actually pivot, right? So I listen to the individual person, and then I go to the group, as we've done to you, and say, let me listen to you. What's resonating for you? What are you hearing? What are you curious about? Right? So that I can listen to both. What do you have thoughts, Chris, about this question about listening in front of a large group?
I think I would just echo. You mentioned this earlier. For me, it's about the self-talk, and am I listening more to the voice in my head that how do I look, how do I sound, or am I trying to that sort of mindfulness practice of being fully present in the room with others is how we get to wholehearted listening. Am I listening to the room, as was talked about, without my own agenda of what I'm trying to listen for or what my voice says should or shouldn't be said, to really connect. And I think we can practice that one-on-one, and I think it gets leveled up when we're now talking about our large group, is to be really present in the room with them, which I think is just an advanced skill, but with practice we all can build. Yeah.
Thank you. That's valuable. We have a comment from Carol. She's saying that she's enjoying the two of you sharing versus one presenter. It seems more of the present moment and illustrates the power of collaboration. Couldn't agree more.
Amen. I got to give you a flame for that, Carol. It's so much richer for me when I have Chris with me or a colleague. We try to always have two of us in the room. And part of that, by the way, is we can listen better, right? So if I'm talking and, presenting whatever I'm doing, I can try to be present and listen, but I'm off, it's like the fire hose, the water's coming this way. And Chris can be paying attention and seeing the room and noticing things, whether it's chat or people in the room, and vice versa, right? When he's presenting, you can notice having a listener there with you to capture the narratives in the room and how it's, and to hear, right? Because it sounds different in my head right, than it does coming out of my mouth. So Chris can say, you said the wrong word there, Kat. Or, actually, I don't think people are understanding.
Yeah. I have one question from practice, like more a case than a question, if I may.
Please.
I recently worked with a big manufacturing company on a workshop for HR, and I did a demo where one of the participants took a step forward, and I offered him a prize for showing how an algorithm of picking the right story to tell on the go works. And we did the algorithm work and it worked good, but when he came to telling the right story, which was all about letting go of the fear and starting to work without documentation and shifting towards e-documents, so quite practical, very, very straightforward. But he was sharing in a room of 50 people, and he was sharing like this: there was an episode in my life when I discovered that documents are slowing me down. That's my story. That was it. And the room was like laughing at it. And I was trying to focus the room on listening supportively, but they were like, come on. You want a prize? Okay, I'm going to listen. I'm going to sit in my phone. Go. Make me like, yeah, that's corporate. That's tough. So maybe some thoughts, some advice. What would you do to focus the group on helping this teller and to let him tell the full story?
I see you nodding, Chris. Do you have thoughts and insights?
I'll defer to you and then I'll jump in.
Yeah. Well, I love what you said there, Artem, about coaching the group to listen supportively. Right? We do a lot of programs where we are speaker coaching live. So we teach some storytelling tools. We teach some influencing tools, which are about the performance of the story as much as the content of the story. And then we get folks into small groups and we have them present and we give them feedback. And a big part of that is coaching the listeners on how to listen in this way. How do you put yourself in the shoes of their audience? How do you capture what's working, right? And we coach the peers to be able to give feedback, partly because they have insights we don't, but also because we are training them to be better storytelling coaches for each other after we leave. And we just do it explicitly before it ever starts, right? Before anybody gets up to be coached, we say, okay, here's the deal. You are co-creating this moment. Here's how we want you to listen. Turn on your cameras, sit forward, put away your devices. Let's give them a wild round of applause before we start. So we're creating the culture rather than just trusting that in the moment, right? The other thing is just to ask in the moment to the audience, like, what worked? What was compelling? Or what do you want to know more about? So that you're drawing them into shifting their own narrative about their relationship to the story. Yeah. That's what comes to mind. What would you add, Chris?
I would just add building on that about the culture. I remember an experience once. I was at a program as a participant for a week-long program, 150 people from all over the world. And the program director opened up the event by saying, look around the room. Every one of you is an artist, poet, and genius. And she went on to explain that what I took from that, she went on to explain what she meant by that. And what I took from that was she was really trying to create a culture where, what if I had that mentality that whatever Artem is about to say or whatever Kat is about to say, there's genius in it, there's artistry, there's creativity. And so my job is to listen for that, right? No matter what comes out, I'm grounded in assumption that these are all artists, poets, and geniuses. So there's wisdom. And so I may laugh off a comment as you described in the story, I laugh it off, but then I can come back and say that was indeed delightful. And what do we think the wisdom is underneath that very brief story, right? That we can then retrain to be like, it can be both that, because now my attention back is, wait, wisdom, let me listen differently, and so that is about how do we train ourselves with that kind of focus the inherent assumption that everyone is an artist, a poet, and a genius. And my job as a listener is to help extract that with them. So.
Oh, just yesterday I was talking and sharing on the workshop this small part of Viktor Frankl's talk on how when you see a man above expectations, you make him what he is able to become. You just, this is a great way to put it in listening. So thank you so much. This is great. Love it. All right. We still have time for the traditional ending question from both of you. That's a bonus. So let me repeat it and take your pick on what story would you like to be told. So a lighthouse can show us where the danger is, but a chain of lighthouses can guide us out of the dangerous waters. What story would you like to hear more people tell, just like more lighthouses around, to make the now brighter?
I'll go first. Echoing Suzanne's earlier, we're all going to echo this element of, I do think something about vulnerability, or to play on the metaphor, to think about what are the dangers that I'm holding inside, to bring in a bit of vulnerability and courage to name those. I think there's a bit of, for me, it surfaces our shared humanity, right? The things that we are collectively worried about that keep us up at night or whatnot. And so stories that invite that sharing in a reciprocal way. So my sharing invites you as well to bring forth what those vulnerabilities. I would end that then with the vulnerability piece. I would also say, continue to share stories about what matters to you and why. That really kind of digging deep. I've had, I think, some of the biggest ahas about our connection and our shared humanity when I really get to hear from people what really matters to you and why is that so important to you, right? To sort of cut through the noise and really get down into the heart of what's at people's core and what's important to them and whatnot. And so the vulnerability, but then I would build on that with also stories about what matters to you and why. Kat?
Yeah, for me, what's coming up in this moment in Stories of Now, especially in the States, but I think in the world, maybe not especially in the States, are stories of nuance and complexity, stories about both and. I feel like we have so many, this is the one right way, or this is the right one way, or these are the good people and these are the bad people. And what I do think is true in the States that feels a little bit new to me in my life is that the principle or the value of finding common ground and collaboration and even compromise used to be something that felt like it was valued. And now it feels like it's almost demonized, right? If I can find a bridge where I value you across difference, or we can come to some common ground, maybe I'm betraying my cause or my people. So, and I think that's very, very dangerous. So I would like to see more stories of commonality, stories of nuance, stories of complexity rather than just, I know the right answer.
I love the resonance between what you were sharing just now and what the speakers shared before. Kat, what you're saying is very close to what Annette Simmons mentioned earlier, and Chris, to what you're saying about what matters was also mentioned, I guess, by Rain Bennett. I love how you put it differently and mix it with the different components. So perfect answers. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure, guys. Let's give all our fires to Kat and Chris. This was sensational, and thank you for being here again this year.
Of course, anytime. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much. All righty. We'll be moving forward, and our next speaker who's bringing the light to the conference is